clients for a while. So our sales, went up dramatically. We went from 5,000 in year one to about 100,000 year two to 500,000 in year three. So our growth was quite fast and furious during those first couple of years, what kind of things that people had. And a whole bunch of people reached out, including one woman who said, I've sold all my rental properties and I've just gone into private lending because they cash flow so much better. Like on every 100,000, you could be making $12,000 to $20,000 a year. If you were going to buy a rental property, for example, that was worth $500,000, it's highly unlikely that you're going to make $100,000 a year in cash flow. So yes, a big part of that is going to be your active and your passive appreciation in the property. But in terms of the money that you're actually taking home at the end of every month, you can't really compare the two. So for me, I think it's important to be diversified in both. Ideally, I use the money that I had retained in my business to buy the asset, meaning ideally I want to have a portfolio of rental properties. But on the personal side, I have a very big home equity line of credit. So for the last few years, interest rates have been really nicely low, 3%. So if you're loaning out at 20%, you're making 17% on that split.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Canadian Success Stories. In today's episode, we have Serena Holmes. She ran her own multi-award-winning brand experience agency for close to 18 years. Under her leadership, that agency grew to a team of 10 full-timers at their head office and over 2,200 part-time staff across the country. At the same time, she started investing in real estate, and now she has transitioned to being a private lender, helping clients close properties, complete construction projects, and run their small businesses. So if you're interested to learn about her journey of entrepreneurship and also discover the seldom talked about world of private lending, then this is the right episode for you. So stick around, we'll be right back with that interview. Hello, and welcome to Serena on the S Factor channel. Hello, Serena. How are you today?
Hello. I'm great. Thanks. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. Thanks for joining me. I do appreciate that. We have a lot to cover, and it's a really fascinating story. So why don't we just get started with your time with
Sure.
Tigris?
Sure. So I started with Tigris back in 2004. At the time, I was literally just graduating from university, and the founder of Tigris had actually run some events at a company I used to work with. And she approached me saying, I'm starting this new company. Do you want to come on board? At the time, because I was just finishing university, I was trying to just make as much money as I could. So I started working with her along with a few other promotional marketing agencies. And I guess by the time the fall rolled around, she basically approached me asking if I would come on board full-time as a manager. And at the time, I had no idea how she was going to pay me. She was still working from home, literally in her parents' home. We were shoved up against some floor-to-ceiling wall units, not very glamorous at all. But literally less than a week later, a city councilor reached out to us asking to hire an event planner for some events that he had going on. And at the time, she told him that event planners typically charge $40 to $50 an hour. He said his budget was only $20. So somehow she negotiated that he would pay me full time at $20 an hour, and then she would have me half the time. So she kind of got out of paying me, but still got me to help out in the office. So I divided my time between going down to Nathan Phillips Square, right down to City Hall, and then the rest of the time with her. And as that contract neared an end, the counselor wanted to renew for another 6 months. And I just, didn't really feel good about working for him for a number of different factors. And I ended up basically talking to the founder at that point in time. And she offered me partnership, which I wasn't super keen on. I was like, trying to be a journalist still. I just want to see what happens with the opportunities I'm interviewing for. And they didn't pan out. So I just took that as a sign that maybe I should explore this as a more serious opportunity. And the benefit of buying into a company that has really no sales is that instead of buying in, I basically assumed half of the debt that she had accumulated in the first year of business. So literally a month later, we started booking some really big events with a big telecommunications company. That led into a very, very big opportunity with another company as well. And both of them became our biggest clients for a while. So our sales, went up dramatically. We went from 5,000 in year one to about 100,000 year two to 500,000 in year three. So our growth was quite fast and furious during those first couple of years. And then about 4 years in, the founder decided to leave the business for some personal reasons. So I was faced with a crossroads. Like, did it make sense to buy her out? Did it make sense that we just take what's in the bank and walk away and shut things down? Or should I partner with another company and they would assume half of Tigris, but I would have no investment in their company? And I think based on the goodwill that we had accumulated with our clients and the reputation that we'd worked so hard to build, it just made sense to assume that risk and buy her out. So that took a couple of years. And then I just continued to build the business on my own from that point.
Okay, excellent. And how long did you actually own and operate the business?
Yeah, so I took over complete operations in 2008. So I would have run it completely on my own until February of this year. And I guess that would be how many years? 14 years. Like, can't do the math in my head.
Right, 14 years. That's a very
Yeah.
long time.
hmm
And what are some of your major accomplishments, you would say, in those 14 years?
Yeah, I mean, I built it up from being, a partnership, just two of us working in her parents' basement, to 10 of us working full time in an office space that had room for 15 of us with about 2,500 part time staff. So I think I built it up to quite a large size. During the time that I was running it, I also ended up helping us secure 18 awards for recognition of our work and our business. We were nominated for several others as well. So most of those came in between 2014 to 2022. Um, and then I think also just having that impact on other people, like being able to provide work opportunities to literally thousands of people across the country as well as across the states, I think is one of the most notable accomplishments.
Okay, awesome. So in terms of the events, what were majority of these events?
Yeah, it really depended on the client. So in some cases, it could be doing product or service demonstrations at a trade show or in a retail environment. In other cases, it could be high volume street sampling, like getting out 30,000 bags of chips outside of a Blue Jays game or something like that. We even partnered up with a company that's the world's largest supplier of drywall and drywall compound. And we provided 3 full-time staff to go from job site to job site, literally all across the country for 5 months. So we basically secured trucks that we branded, armed them with all the materials that they needed, and managed their itinerary and their hotels to basically do all of these, brand experience type of programs with other people using the products at job sites and stuff like that. So it literally, sometimes you just never thought of doing something like that before, and then an opportunity would come up. We even built like a 500-pound alarm clock that we pushed all around Toronto, and we led into a 100-person pillow fight in like one of the large office towers downtown as part of like a viral video shoot for a large financial services type of company. So never thought of doing something like that before, but sometimes it could really out of the box. It just depended on the client.
I like the sound of the pillow fight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could have gotten a lot of trouble. Luckily, we didn't, but it only happened that way because it was raining outside. So we had to come up with like a last minute game plan.
Nice, nice, very good. So anyone who is sort of running a similar type of business or thinking about it, I think one of the things that comes up all the time is scalability.
Mhm.
So how did you go about scaling the business? If you could just talk about maybe one or
Yeah.
two approaches.
Yeah. I mean, for us, because we were a service based business, I'm not going to say there's no risk, but it's not the same kind of risk as if, you want to develop a product and you literally need a lot of startup capital. So it's a very different kind of business. For us, I think scaling was a natural progression. So as the work is coming in, you hire more people to go out and complete the work. And there's the people going out and doing that work in terms of the people on the street and the brand ambassadors, or there's the people behind the scenes that are planning the work. So for us, I think the biggest challenge in scaling is just, nowadays people work from home. Back then, that really wasn't a thing. So we had to have the space to accommodate people to work in the office as we were growing. So it went from initially 3 of us or 2 of us to 3 of us, 2 part-time, 2 full-time, 4 full-time, and then growing from there. So I think it's adapting from home-based business type of offices, bought an office, moved into a larger lease space. So it's just trying to grow and accommodate all of that, and know that you've got a very close eye on your finances to know, like, if you're going to make a move like that, not only now do you have to pay for the bandwidth of all those extra people, you're paying for the overhead of an office space and all of that. So I think you've got to be very, very close, keep a very close eye on your finances to make sure that you can scale up appropriately. I was in a mentorship group with a woman that started a kale chip company, and it's now like expanded to many other product offerings. But I think her startup capital was like $1 million. So you have your facility, you got all the things to make the product. She had to spend $10,000, for example, on this fan that like blows air to make sure no contaminants come into the office. Like it was a whole other level of entrepreneurship. But I think the good thing with a service-based business is that your startup costs are generally lower. You're looking at computer, internet, as you start to build business opportunities, then maybe you're starting to hire people and stuff like that. But I think it's a lot easier to scale in comparison.
Right, right. A lot of very important things you mentioned, especially bringing in that differentiation that, yes, there are different levels of entrepreneurship
Hmm.
and different levels of challenges associated with the business operations.
Yeah.
Perfect. One of the things you mentioned quite a bit is about the people.
Hmm.
So, what was your strategy when it came to recruiting? Of course, you have the technical set of skills, which will vary from position to position. But
Hmm.
in terms of the behavioral traits of the culture fit, what were some of the things that you looked for?
Yeah, I think that it's very different if we were hiring, for example, with our brand ambassadors. One strategy that we adapted was having very large group interviews, and the reason for that is not only to maximize our time. So instead of meeting with one person taking a half an hour, in a whole day, you can maybe meet with like 10 or 12 people. We would meet with 10 to 12 people for half an hour and then cycle that through and literally meet with maybe 100 people in a day instead. And the real value to that is that we're trying to hire the best of the best. You want the people that have dynamic energy, and you want the people that at the end of the day, you're going to remember them for a really good reason or maybe a really bad reason. But you can see maybe how they would be like out in a large crowd or like what they would be like in that kind of an environment. And I think if you're just interviewing one on one, it doesn't allow you to see how they compare and kind of stack up to other people. So that was something that we adopted for those two reasons, to maximize time and also to really evaluate more their personality and their charisma and stuff like that, because that's what mattered for that position. When we're hiring internally, that's totally different. Obviously, we're working in the office. I think the main thing is like being able to manage your time appropriately, to multitask, what your computer skills are like, and things like that. So oftentimes we do the regular interview. Then we'd lead into maybe a bit more of a group interview with other team members to see if they'd be a fit for the entire dynamic in the office and stuff like that, going through reference checks and things of that nature. But I think the biggest challenge is it's kind of like dating, right? Like until you really are with those people, like they could say all the things that they want, that they're really good or really bad at something. And then once you see them in action, we did find sometimes that, people maybe overstated their abilities to a certain extent, or maybe their strengths fell in a different area than they thought it did, and then sometimes there could be issues that came about from those things, and in some cases people really surprise you and they did like way better than you expected, and other times they ended up being a disappointment for one reason or another. I think until you literally are working alongside someone, you can't no interview is going to 100% show you everything you need to see.
Makes sense. Absolutely. Moving along, I believe that you merged with another agency
Hmm.
in February of this year,
That's right.
and now you're involved in more of an advisorial capacity, correct?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. I had actually tried to sell the business around February of 2020. The girl that I promoted and trained to be my mat leave replacement for my office had been with me for about 6.5 years. And then she resigned when my daughter was only 2.5 months old. So at that time, there was, 10 of us full time in the office, a couple thousand people part time. I had an infant at home. I really didn't know how I was going to possibly run the business without someone assuming that leadership in my absence. I couldn't be there all the time. So I hired. So, we just could to scale back. And then I'm past the one girl that I kept kind of throughout all of this resigned in January for a fresh opportunity. And I just knew like I felt like I really took the business as far as I could on my own. I didn't feel like I had it in me to try to scale back up to what we were before COVID. So I got a mutual release from the company, and I just said the only thing left at this point really is the website. There's still a lot of value to the SEO and the leads that are coming in. So I think, that would be a value potentially to another agency. So I spoke to 12 to 15 agencies, about six were interested and got a handful of offers and pretty much had it locked down in a couple weeks. So now that new agency basically, hit the ground running. They take care of all the new incoming opportunities. And then if there's anything that they need my support with, whether that's identifying past experiences with different clients, things to do with staff and things like that, they loop me in on anything that's required. But for the most part, they've taken over running everything.
Okay. All right. Excellent. So now we're going to be talking a little bit about one of my favorite topics, which is real estate. And I guess your foray into real estate isn't obviously recent because you had investment properties before, right?
That's right.
So
Yeah.
how did you start investing in real estate?
Yeah, I think it was always of interest to me. When the market collapsed in the States back in 2008, that was really when I was first interested. But the problem was financing. A bank, I had the down payment, but I couldn't find a bank in Canada or the States that would finance a property like that. So I had to kind of wait. Some time passed, and I ended up getting a business coach. And she just said, the amount of money I was sitting in the business is more than you really need. So you should consider taking out some of it as a short term loan and putting it to use as an investment of some kind. So at the time, the dollar was par with the States. Obviously, that isn't something that's happened commonly throughout history. Usually it's one end or the other, usually more on one end than the other. So at the time, I started looking at properties in Florida. And because the dollar was par, I was able to kind of put together money that I had between my home equity line of credit and the business and some savings. And I bought a short term rental property at a golf course and country club in Fort Myers. So I kept that for 4 years, and then the dollar shifted, and I ended up selling it and doubling my money during that time. I waited about a year before I started making more moves, but I ended up signing up as a member for a real estate education company. And I went to their first investor summit and bought a couple pre construction properties, one that I kept untenanted, and then the other that I sold on assignment. And then I also invested in some other things like syndicated mortgages, land development, started to become aware of and started investing in private lending. And just one thing kind of led to another down that path.
Okay. So this is where a very interesting thing comes up, which is private lending. So how does one go about becoming a private lender? And if you could just go step by step and just include, even the smallest of details if you think that's important.
Yeah, I know it's not something that's commonly on people's radar. I know for me, I had never thought of something like this before. But I think once you become part of this investors community, you start to see how many opportunities that are really out there. For me, I started talking about some of my investments with a friend of mine, and she's like, I really need to introduce you to someone. He's a mortgage broker. He oftentimes has people that require short-term loans for any number of things. It could be a business loan. It could be to pay off a line of credit so they can close on their mortgage. Because in a lot of cases, banks don't want to see that you have any debt. So they ideally want you to be at zero when you get your mortgage. So if you've racked up, $20,000 on your line of credit, and you need to have that at zero in a couple weeks or a month from now, you may be willing to spend a couple $1,000s to wipe that clean so your mortgage can go ahead as planned. So those would be more like bridge loan type of opportunities. In other cases, if someone needs a small business loan, that could be a principal and interest loan. For example, maybe on a $10,000 loan, they're willing to pay $400 a month in interest plus part of the principal back to you, or it could be interest only, in which case they would just make interest payments and at the end of the term, you get your principal back. At that point, the mortgage broker that I was dealing with just sent me a few opportunities. I had my lawyer at the time review them just to make sure that people owned the properties that were stated that they were securing with the general loan agreement. I started out with three. I think one was worth 45,000, one was for 20,000, one was maybe 10, and started kind of slowly. And things were going well. So the following year, I did a few more the following year, and then at the beginning of this year, because I'm part of a real estate investors community, I reached out just to see what kind of things that people had, and a whole bunch of people reached out, including one woman who said, I've sold all my rental properties and I've just gone into private lending because they cash flow so much better. Like on every 100,000, you could be making $12,000 to $20,000 a year. If you were going to buy a rental property, for example, that was worth $500,000, it's highly unlikely that you're going to make $100,000 a year in cash flow. So yes, a big part of that is going to be your active and your passive appreciation in the property. But in terms of the money that you're actually taking home at the end of every month, you can't really compare the two. So for me, I think it's important to be diversified in both. Ideally, I use the money that I had retained in my business to buy the asset, meaning like ideally, I want to have a portfolio of rental properties. But on the personal side, I have a very big home equity line of credit. So for the last few years, like interest rates have been really nicely low, like 3%. So if you're loaning out at 20%, you're making 17% on that split. So through that, it's just, you start talking to more people about it. I've been now connected to a few more mortgage brokers. There's also a lot of people in my community that are raising money to develop properties or redevelop properties. Maybe they're buying an underperforming property and they need money to renovate it. Once that's done, they get it refinanced by the bank, pay back their investors. So it's just being part of a community that, the more people you start to get to know and you start talking about these things, it seems like the opportunities just snowballed at that point in time. I do think it's important to be aware of your comfort level for risk. A lot of times I talk to people and they're like, that sounds so risky. But it's not like I'm dumping all the money I have into just one spot. Ideally, I'm diversifying it with a number of investors. So I think right now, for example, I have, I think, 20 of them on the go. So no one loan is worth more than maybe $50,000. And that's the way that I kind of diversify my risk, because the chances of all of them defaulting at the same time is very, very slim. And in 4.5 years, the only thing that's ever happened is that one of the payments was a week late. And then in one particular situation with the syndicated mortgages, that's been pretty significantly delayed, but it doesn't mean I'm not making the interest payments. They're still sending those along. It just makes it a little bit longer to get the payout back. So there's tons of opportunities out there. I think it's just a matter of your appetite for risk and trying to, find out what's out there, like talking to as many people as you can.
Okay. All right. Very nicely said. So is this what is commonly called C lending?
Yeah, I mean, probably B and C lending.
BNC. Okay.
Yeah, like in some cases, like with the syndicated mortgages, for example, they're all second position to the bank. So it just depends on some of those situations. There are some opportunities where you could even be in a first position mortgage. So it just depends. One of the mortgage brokers that I'm connected with does offer those first position secured mortgages, meaning that you've got the same rights and privileges as a bank because you're literally funding the mortgage for someone that's buying the property. So it just depends on, again, your appetite for risk. Those are a little bit lower in interest, like they could be 10 to 12%. But they're going that route because they maybe can't get that financing from a bank, or maybe they're not putting down 20%. So they run into kind of traditional funding issues. So it could be, in that case, like, I guess technically you're a B lender, but you're still 100% secured against the property. So if they defaulted or anything happens, you can literally go in and seize the property. And there's obviously legal channels that you'd follow to do so.
Okay, got it. So when someone's trying to close a property, right, and you're funding it, so obviously the loan is secured against that particular property or that particular physical asset, right?
Yeah.
What about, as you said, business loans or any other loans where, there isn't like a physical element there which is secured against? How are those loans secured?
So in the majority of all the loans that I've been a part of, there's still an asset listed. So even if someone needs the funds for their business, in a lot of cases, they'll list their primary residence as like the security in the loan. So that's where, as a realtor, I can use my resources to make sure that they're on title and make sure that, if anything ever happened, if I had to go through legal channels to get that money back, at least I know that they have some equity in that property. And then I usually get the borrower's identification as well. So I want to always know, like, if I'm not in direct contact with them, in some cases I am, but if the broker is setting up the loan, then I want to see that proof of agreement of purchase and sale. I want to know that they own that property. I want to know that, their ID matches. Like, I'll do certain things from a due diligence standpoint just to make sure that I have a clear understanding of who they are if I ever needed to go down that path.
Okay. And what are some of the deals that you refuse? Like, you won't do it?
Yeah, I mean, there's some that, my comfort level has usually been in the range of like $50,000 to $100,000. probably 50 is like my general comfort level. So sometimes I've turned them down if they're too big. There was one where I think it was 80 or 85, and the broker ended up splitting it between me and another lender, just because the way certain things on the numbers looked, I just wasn't 100% sure. In other cases, if the numbers just don't make sense, like if there's no interest or cash flow over a period of time, then I'm not going to absorb the cost of my HELOC interest to see money 2 years from now. Like that's not going to help me now. Or in other cases, if the interest is just too low, I probably wouldn't look at anything below 12 to 14% right now. And especially with interest rates rising, like obviously the higher the interest, the better. What was good at 12% last year is not maybe as good now because now interest rates have gone from like 3% to 6 on my end from a cost perspective. So I think you really want to evaluate the numbers and know that, depending on your situation, like if that was just savings, then 12% is 12%. But for me, I'm using my HELOC. So that's subject to change at any time. So you just always want to make sure that whatever you're doing, you've got some buffer to cover all of those costs as well.
Got it. So you are also a realtor, and this is October 2022.
Yeah.
How do you see the market shaping up in the next few months?
Yeah, I mean, I find it ironic that the government, they put all these rate increases into effect to bring down the value of property to make it more affordable. But because of how high the interest rates are, it's not saving any money. From a conspiracy theory standpoint, I believe that these rate increases have more to do with paying off like the handouts that happened during COVID. Like they've got a lot of CERB money that they've got to pay off. Wouldn't surprise me that's really more the motive than inflation. And I think inflation is more driven by the fact that all these people and companies took a big hit during COVID for 2 years, and everyone's trying to make up for that. So I think there's other things necessarily at play. I think that because of the interest rates, yes, property values are going down. They'll continue to go down for a little while. But the reality is there's just not enough supply. So now it's almost had that opposite effect that, yes, it's bringing down prices, but because of that, now even less people want to list their house because they feel like they'll get more money. So now supply is even going down even more than it was, which I think will potentially start to push prices back up a little bit as time continues. So I think, the government obviously has their reasonings for things. It'll be interesting to see where things go. From all the mortgage brokers that I've spoken to, they all feel that, there could be a couple of smaller increases to come, but then into next year, we'll probably start to see them come down again. And the reality is that even though interest rates have been this high before, like when I bought my first house, it was around 6%. That house was only 190,000. Well, that same house is worth 700,000 now. So obviously they can't, I don't think they really can bring prices or interest rates up to that extent or even higher because the affordability just won't be possible for a lot of people anymore.
Okay. All right. Got it. Your book has come out recently.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a bit about your book, please.
Yeah, so I wrote a book called The Accidental Entrepreneur, and I started writing it at a writing retreat that I went to in San Diego in 2018. And I wrote 18 or so chapters, and then I finished it over the months that happened afterwards. And then I just hit a wall when it came to publishing. I was like, okay, well, I've got this book now, and then what? And I just couldn't figure out necessarily what next steps to follow. And then COVID happened. So I made it a point to rewrite the ending because all this stuff happened that I thought was really relevant. And then I found a publisher that I could kind of go that route of self-publishing and went through editing for probably about 8 months. It was a substantive editing process. So going through it for content and then for spelling and grammar and things like that, design. It officially came out October of last year. And I just felt like my childhood was really crazy. There's a lot of things that happened. And I think because of all the things that happened, I learned at a young age that I couldn't depend on anyone to give me any handouts. Like I really knew that I'd have to make my own way in life. And I learned that very young. And I think that just led me down this path of entrepreneurship in a way that maybe it wouldn't have if I had, my parents hadn't split, if my brother hadn't passed away, if I wasn't moving around between family members and ex-boyfriends and stuff like that. And if I'd had that stability, maybe I wouldn't have pursued this path in entrepreneurship. So I just saw how all of that was connected. And then there was all these business lessons and life lessons that kind of come up along the path. So I just felt like it would resonate with some people that were going through different challenges and stuff like that. And, the feedback overall has been very positive from the book that, a lot of people felt like that meant something to them. They've gone through something similar, whether it was in family or business or whatever it was. So even though maybe it would ruffle a few feathers in my own family to have, brought these things to light that are going back many, many years ago, it kind of all went hand in hand with my entrepreneurial journey per se.
Yep. And and that's an incredible journey of resilience as well. Just going through all that trouble and stuff like that. But you basically use that in a very positive way.
Mm-hmm.
And you said, as you rightfully said, that no one's going to hand me nothing. So I got to go out there and get it, which you did. And you have diversified your portfolio, to speak, right? Because you were a business owner, but on the side, you were always doing real estate investing. And now that, you stepped away from running that business, but you got so many other things going on. You're a real estate agent, you are doing the private lending, and you're doing investing as well.
Yeah.
So that's incredible.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I like to keep busy.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate that. If people wanted to find you, where would they look?
Yeah, so a couple of places, but primarily on social at Serena Holmes Realtor. So Serena Holmes, HOLMES Realtor, or also Serena Holmes Author for everything that's related to my book. So I like to share things related to business and inspiration and overcoming challenges and things of that nature.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Serena, for your time today. I really appreciate that. And I wish you all the best.
Great. Thank you.